All right, we're on the air. Welcome to the second installment of Through the Looking Glass with Lucy, Flavoski, and Slag Nasty. Tonight's topics will be antinatalism, stoicism, and euthanasia. So, Lucy, you're a proponent for antinatalism. Can you kind of give us a rundown of what that consists of?
Well, sure. In short, antinatalism is the belief that it is better to not bring sentient beings into existence than it is, to. This obviously focuses on humans, but it could also be extracted to other animals or other creatures. And the two basic categorizations of arguments from natalists are the bad and suffering which one endures in their own life, and the bad and suffering which that person might inflict onto others.
Okay. And does antinatalism, is that like the belief that living and dying is worse than never have being born at all?
Yes, it's basically the notion that a person in their life existing will have good, and those good things will be good, and they'll have bad things which will be bad. You could chalk it to pain and pleasure, basically.
Yeah.
And antinatalism is saying that those bad things are bad, so that is why they're in support of them not being born, but also that those good things that happen in people's lives, such as pleasure, don't really matter because the person never existed to begin with to experience those things.
Well, let me put my input on that. I think the definition matters a lot because you got to think. So let's think of a human being, and this is very out there, very philosophical. Let's say a human life is pulled from the ether, a place of not knowing and not caring, an apathetic state of life, and then they become a human being. I could see antinatalism's argument if that was the case, but if a human being's consciousness is manifested when its brain develops, I could see it having a little less impact. And from what I've read, a lot of antinatalists look at it in the way of pulled from the ether. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Like that baby that was born, and everybody who was born, it was not a voluntary decision. It was not a choice for them, and the suffering that they were upon when they were born.
Yeah, definitely. Slag, is there anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I would say so. To me, it sounds like it's almost like a fall from heaven. Like maybe they are apathetic; they're being pulled in. I don't necessarily agree with this philosophy. I mean, it's been crafted by people that are far smarter than I am, but I do think that there's valuable lessons in there. And I am glad that Snug mentioned also it can apply to animals, because what I would use for an example are the people that get pets, but then they pay them no mind. I mean, that's not good. That pet didn't ask to be brought into your home just to be neglected. And I believe having a child is along the same vein. It's like they didn't ask to be born, so it's up to you. This is really kind of common sense. It's up to you to provide the best environment you can, but you also have a responsibility, because I don't think anyone wants people having children that are going to be brought up to just kind of like rob other people's kids. That's like the common joke, is that your kid's going to end up, mugging mine. So it's definitely a big responsibility. And I may have mentioned before that I feel that it's a moral. It may be known as an immoral act to bring a life into this world of suffering and lies and evil, but I think they shouldn't get away from their moral obligation to make the best of it.
Yeah, definitely.
So would you say, Slag Nasty, that if you're a parent and you knowingly bring somebody into the world and know that they will experience great suffering, but try your very hardest to teach them all that you can about how to reduce that suffering, how to try and transcend it and turn it into something good, making life's pleasures worth living, would you say that is a rationalization of bringing them into the world and makes their life worth it? Or do you think that it's still forcing something upon them which they have no control over and is therefore wrong?
I myself, I would look at the intent, and that's why I mentioned that I think that moral people should be the ones having babies.
Well,
immoral people, there's plenty of them, but I would say that. Oh, what did you want to say, Fluff?
I actually saw a post on the Reddit for antinatalism. I didn't read it. I just saw the header that said that my mother told me she only had me for financial reasons. And I think that's kind of what y'all are getting at. It's about the intent of the parent.
I mean, I think that life is suffering. I don't think there is really getting around. And I guess my argument for antinatalism would be that it is provable that there is more suffering and bad and pain in life than there is pleasure and good things. And of course, there is no way to really truly prove this. It's more just an idea. But, chronic pain exists, but chronic pleasure does not exist. And for example...
Go ahead.
If you were to ask somebody, if you were to say you'll experience 5 minutes of amazing pleasure, the best pleasure a human can, but in turn you'll have to experience 5 minutes of the worst pain that a human can endure, I don't think a rational person would make that trade-off.
But I disagree with the way that that's worded, and I disagree with your statements because, nobody's going to take 5 minutes of intense displeasure or pain to get 5 minutes of extreme pleasure. But I think it's different than that. In life, what we find is that there are really good moments in your life, and there are really bad moments. But from what I see when I look at antinatalism is it's mostly just the mundane, the having to get out of bed in the morning and go to a job you hate and be around people you hate and watch the world burn all around you. And that's honestly really what you make it. And this isn't like people driving nails into your legs all day. This is just you going through the mundaneness of life, which you can make a whole lot better in some ways. So I would say that your assertion that the negativity and the pain in life outweighs the happiness or the good times, I think it's a net win for positivity depending on how you live your life. And obviously there's some shitty situations that people are born into. But even in that sense, when you look around you, it's usually these rich guys that are the saddest. And you look at the poor people and they're the happiest. The kids in Africa that don't really have much, they run around and they make do with what they have, even though they go through... Go ahead.
I would like to make the distinction that this same process does not apply for living people, because they have already been born into that choice has already been made for them. So I think what I'm saying about my argument is that it's pretty much strictly for the idea of not making somebody exist. I think that when somebody does exist, that it's a whole different ballpark.
I'd like to interject and say that, as I mentioned before, I think it's your moral duty to equip your children. And I think what we're talking about, I don't necessarily want to get off of the topic and, quote unquote, move on to something else. But I believe that Stoicism has a valuable contribution to this conversation, because a Stoic would probably just say that, well, that pain, that pleasure, it's not really about that. It's about how they cope with those types of situations. And I think that if you have an obligation to equip your offspring and other people that you feel responsible for with the ability to deal with the fact that there's monsters out there. One example that I want to get too controversial is the raising of daughters. You see a lot of T-shirts that say like, "Oh, don't come near my daughter, I got a shotgun." Well, If you'd raised her properly, she would have already made a decision that means you would never have to bring up that shotgun. You can raise your children to make the right decisions. The key is how do you do that, and whether or not you're actually a good teacher. You know, I mean, you can't just hit them over the head. You've got to make it palatable to them. Otherwise, children will just naturally rebel, and they may even go the opposite way. You know?
And going back to what you said and Snugglington said, is let's try to keep it more on the philosophical side of antinatalism. I don't want to stray off topic. Snugglington brought up a good point. What we're talking about mostly applies to people that have already been born, which you have to an extent, because if you're going to deny a life being born, you kind of have to argue for why it should be. But let's try to take a step back and think about why should people not be born? Why is it negative to be born? Why would it be better not to be born?
Because there is provably more evil and negative in the world than there is good and pleasure. And the world is, well, existence in general, I think, is clouded with malevolence. And, touching upon stoicism, while that is a way to deal with it, I don't think there is denying that life is pretty much just suffering.
I mean, the source of this suffering is your fellow people. So perhaps if they were better or made better, then there would be less of these problems,
Well, that goes into...
There's definitely issues. I mean, however, that also doesn't cover, being born with cancer or being born sickly or with another sort of disability. That is something that we can only try to solve maybe medically, but I think it comes down to people. It's not, evil doesn't just rain from the sky. It's made, it's perpetrated.
Well, this goes into Thomas Robert Malthus's Cycle of Misery, where he talks about how there are limiting factors on the birth rate and the death rate, and he predicted a crisis that was gonna happen if we kept having kids. And it was very entertaining in his time, and a lot of people fed into it, and a lot of people still to this day fall into that overpopulation, grand extinction. But what they didn't factor in, and what's funnily enough happened right around his time, I believe right after his death, was advancements in agriculture, advancements in shipping and freight and railways. And it just shows what could be right around the corner that could, solve the issues that we're facing now that seem insurmountable,
But I've always, had a thought about antinatalists is whether or not some of these people, whether or not their end goal is to have humanity go extinct. Obviously, eventually, humanity and conscious life itself will be gone at some point. But I do get the picture with some of these people that, their goal is to kind of speed up the process of getting rid of, rational thinking beings, which I can see as an argument against antinatalism, that this exists, our plane of base reality exists, and to get rid of that would be a waste in a way.
Well, let me go ahead and tear that a little rant. Not that I disagree with you, just on that idea of marching into oblivion and having all conscious life just go extinct. That kind of makes me a little angry, because it's just life is so intricate. Like sentient life, especially on our scale of, just being able to form thoughts and make technology and paint paintings. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. And to me, no matter how much suffering that we have to go through to do that, I think it's a net worth it. And also, this goes back to the meaning of life. And you have birth, which, let's just say it's neutral. Let's kind of meet the antinatalist halfway and say that it's neutral. Birth is neutral, right? The only upside to birth is that now you're here. Well, death, we all agree, or most of us would agree, is a negative. Dying when you're alive is horrible. It sucks. Now, the meaning of life to me is doing enough between the neutral birth and the negative death that it both adds a positive attribution to your birth and it overcomes the negative attributes of death. And to me, that's the moral of life. Doing enough while you're alive that it was worth it to have been born and to have died. Any thoughts, John, on that?
I think that's great, actually. I do think that we're put on this planet to do something more than just eat
Definitely.
and bully people. So because the Elon Musk's or Da Vinci's or Zenobia's, Artemisia, she was the evil queen in the 300 sequel. These people had a big impact, very very positive impact too. And
Yeah.
they still are today. So, but do they have the tools they need to deal with with the horrid that's going? I won't deny that there's definitely a lot of problems, and I can understand where they're coming from with antinatalism, saying that they don't have for example, they don't have a moral obligation to have children in the first place, But
Well,
there's definitely people could say there's a utilitarian reason to have them. It's kind of like I'm stuck here, so now I'm bringing you in. I don't actually really agree with that, but there are people where they'll have large families, like the third world, for example. The reason why I have large families is not really just the lack of birth control. It's not a problem. Just roll up a big rock into the bedroom, block the bedroom door. It's because they're relying on the next generation to help take care of them. It's like a retirement plan,
yeah.
But they also pay back their children by being loving, always trying to be there for them. I mean, this is an ideal situation. They love their children. They'll try to provide for them. They'll even sacrifice their life for them.
Well, I
Do you
want to
think
bring.
that?
Go ahead, Snuggleton.
Sure. I was just gonna bring up the question: do you think that supporting poor nations such as Africa with, things like medications, financial aid, food, water, do you think that's a positive or a negative? And the reason I ask is because the way I see it, some places in Africa, their IQs and their ways of living, I just don't see it that they could get out of that poverty anytime soon. And, by us supporting them, we're almost continuing that suffering.
Well, that's exactly.
Bringing,
I'm glad that you said that because that goes right into Malthus's cycle of misery, and that's what he said. When the Irish were starving and impoverished, and people wanted to give them aid, Malthus came out and said, "No, we shouldn't do that because we're just extending their suffering. We're putting them in a cycle of misery, and it's going to drain us dry too." And that's the us versus them.
I would say, first off, the real problem that happened in the continent of Africa was the improving of healthcare and the improvements in agriculture. When the Europeans were frankly raping the continent, they still brought these advances with them. However, then those were taken away. So suddenly you had this massive population boom with all of these benefits of modern society, but then those were taken from them. So they were stuck with this excess population, and then it kind of went downhill from there. Now, another thing is you mentioned the Irish, and the Africans do it as well. The ones that could move, the ones that it's just like us. We have a bad neighborhood. If we have the opportunity, we leave.
Definitely.
But the people that are able to escape that cycle of misery do so. And, they come to, like, for example, they come to America, they go to Europe, they bring their own cultures, their own ideas, and, hopefully they're open to the society that's given them shelter. They're usually, the ones that I've met are usually quite happy that they're in a much nicer situation. So I think that it's a double-edged sword. I don't think that we should support the system that has resulted in the mess in Africa, in some of these African nations, I should say, that was basically the successor to the Europeans, who also caused their own problems there.
Definitely.
So it's tough, though, and like, for example, there are celebrities, I can't stand it. They come out and they say, I'm going to go to such and such country, and we're gonna get all of the girls and have them go to school like Oprah did. Well, the fact of the matter is that men are still useful. There's never going to be a time when they're not. So what you really should be doing is focusing on uplifting people from being, for example, dirt farmers, subsistence farmers, then you can focus on healing the other problems that you see in the society. I think that we're meddling over there in certain ways with like half-baked ideas that really aren't just going to work for anyone. And like, for example, Oprah's schools actually caused the big problems for some of the girls. They had sexual abuse allegations come up. They've had other schools that were targeted by terrorist organizations. You know, whole schools of girls, 80 girls just kidnapped.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, that's my opinion on that issue.
As far as that goes, I don't know enough about that to really have a conversation about like what we've been doing in Africa. So, I mean, Snuggling, do you have any opinions on that? Because like I'm not really in a position because I don't know enough about that to talk about it.
Well, yeah, I didn't clearly state it when I mentioned it, but my opinion would certainly be that, giving help and funds and charity to Africa clearly, causes these people to have more children. And, like Slag Nasty said, sometimes the children can be had for an economic reason. And all that's going to do is, when those funds and that food run out, then there's just a significant increase in the population, and all those people are suffering and starving. And if you look at the statistics, it's really amazing how much of a bad world it is. I mean, 11 million people die every year from infectious diseases, and the birth rates in Africa have just been going up and up and up and up. And it harms.
Well, I would wonder.
Wikipedia, and they just talk about how approximately 20,000 people die every day just from hunger.
Yeah.
But that's not a problem that's unique to just that continent. I mean, we have that issue all over the place.
Well,
I do see specifically what you're talking about.
I would wonder if their birth rate matches birth rates of other areas of the same population, or if we see, because it seems like your whole argument or conversation is based on when we provide aid, do we see a rise in birth rate? I wonder if there's any correlation there.
There is.
There is? Okay. That's very interesting. See, I didn't even know that. I'd have to look into that.
And, bringing up IQ is a touchy subject, but some countries in Africa, Ethiopia, Nigeria, places like that, some of these places have IQ in the 60s and 70s, some even in the high 50s. And at IQs at that level, a nation cannot sustain democracy. So really, no matter what we do, there's not too much of a solution there.
Well, I mean, it's hard to develop a high IQ when you're starving to death, living in poverty without education.
Well, and war. I mean, the thing is, I'm never going to forget a man I knew named Gus. He was a saint. He had very powerful philosophy. And he would say, how can these children study with the sounds of gunfire all night?
Yeah.
And he wasn't talking about anywhere else except for Los Angeles.
Really?
It's like, he was saying, I mean, I've been in LA. It's not like Lebanon, but, there are certain areas that they kind of have some issues there. And it's like people are trying to hunker down. They're trying to focus. But I do think that same sort of phenomena happens in Africa for sure. I mean, the problem is the approach. How are you going to educate people? How are you going to stop people from fucking?
Exactly.
How are you going to stop? I mean, we have that problem here. I personally just know people that are completely unfit to be parents. Completely. They don't have the tools necessary. They may even be a little selfish. Like they just don't get it.
Well, I mean, that can go back into my generation. And I mean, I'm 23 almost. My generation is made fun of a lot for making teen pregnancy a norm. And there's really no backlash against it. When a teen mother gets pregnant, she posts her pictures. She's like, oh, look at my baby. I'm so happy. We're not married, whatever. And there's no social backlash for that. But it's definitely bad for the child. And it's bad for the mother. I think a lot of I think there was a higher rate of miscarriage and a very high rate of premature birth in teen mothers. I'm pretty sure.
Well, and it also disrupts their studies, and I'm not going to say it blunts their potential, but it certainly changes their path. It's very hard to be a single mother and excel. No
Oh,
offense. I'm
definitely.
sure there are ones that hack it quite great, and there's plenty of stories. But it's you. You should be focusing on, if you're going to have children, you should be ready. You should be. It's all common sense. You should be ready. You should have that focus. You should maybe even have a plan. I mean, if you accidentally have a child, hopefully you've already got stuff together. I have a friend like that, Alex. His baby was an accident. But you know what? The guy's got his stuff together, as much as he can. He's a good dad. He's a responsible man. So I think antinatalism, maybe in my opinion, I mean, you guys already know that I don't personally agree with this. That doesn't mean that
Yeah.
I think it's stupid. I don't think it's stupid. I just feel that it goes against my own personal philosophies. But I feel that antinatalism should be something that people read about before they have children. And they should
Definitely.
realize the impacts. That's why it still has value. They should realize the impacts of what they're doing. They're going to bring a child into this world. They can't afford the health care. They can't, and even if they get state health care or what have you, it's never going to be as high quality as if you shelled out the cash yourself. That's just fact of life. But I can see antinatalism having value as a tool to teach would-be parents.
Yeah, so from what I hear that you're saying, I agree with. You're against antinatalism, but you believe that we have a lot that we can learn from the idea. I'm the same way. I would consider
Yes.
myself more of a stoic, but I do believe that antinatalism has a lot that we can learn from, and it's a very, very interesting idea in school of thought. Snuggleton, what do you have to say about that? What would you say you are?
Well, after looking into the idea of antinatalism, I think I have come to the conclusion, argument-wise, that argument does hold a lot of merit.
Yeah.
I mean, you are bringing a being into the world without them having any choice. I mean, I guess maybe it comes down to, is something better than nothing? But if they're not existing in the first place, does it really?
Well, I mean, it also goes to how you define existence. Like Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, plays in a lot to this. Like, how do you even know that like your ideas are true? And pretty much what happened with Descartes is he started to doubt everything he thought he knew. So he pretty much just dumped all his thoughts out on the floor and went through like a crisis and tried to figure out like, how do I know that I'm actually real? And he was all like, well, I'm thinking, I'm forming thoughts and having ideas. So that's the first thought that I could say I 100% believe is that I think, therefore I am. And that's where you get that from. And that's the thing about, like, we would talk about antinatalism. I would be more for antinatalism if it was proven that these beings that become children are actually pulled out of the ether, maybe somewhere better or without suffering. But if it's just when the baby's brain forms and then they're a person, that's different. Because for me, when antinatalists say, well, we didn't exist, but, we were kind of in the ether, that's existing somewhere. You know what I mean? You're still existing. I would rather have a chance at existence than not have one at all.
I see it as potential. I mean, maybe it's a roll of the dice, but I think that in physics they talk about potential energy. I kind of think that it's that way, that even if we're all on this sinking ship together, it would be good to have well-educated people that can change our world for the better. And frankly, unless we're going to wipe ourselves out, I think that we've already reached that critical mass a long time ago. The saber-toothed tigers didn't do their job. Enough of us escaped to breed and to make culture and to make art. And people can argue that, yes, maybe that was done, maybe that was inspired by the pain that they felt or the barbarity around them. But I think that there's plenty of also examples of just people working together.
Well, to
I can
expand,
see.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
I can see the argument, or not. It's not really an argument. It's just a statement that, all the animals that humanity has killed, all the suffering that has happened through the century, and every shit thing that has happened up to this point is worth it. Because we can be here today having this conversation, or going outside in nature, or doing it whatever it is that brings your conscious your stream of thought upon. You could make the argument that that's all worth it. I just think humanity is on a downward spiral, and I think that's where most people come from on this subreddit. They have a shitty life, their parents didn't care about them, and they were brought here, it wasn't up to them, and they're self-aware of that, and they see it in their minds that they would prefer otherwise, that they're against procreation.
I believe that I'm going to have to gather my thoughts a little on this one. I think that it's and this is no offense to our friends that are antinatalism at all, that it could be misused as a cop-out. I personally believe you should not let fear rule your life. And I think that some people may misunderstand what antinatalism stands for and what potential it could have, like as I said before, as a teaching tool. For example, it's like the guys that they read too many conspiracy theories, and then suddenly now there's no hope in the world. There's their children will never be rich because of the evil, banker guys. Yeah. And I think they're kind of missing the point. I think they're kind of letting this knowledge that they have that they may not fully understand make them scared, And,
I think that kind of gets to stoicism. I mean, I think everybody is oppressed and everybody suffers. So, if you can accept that, I think your life is much, much better off, because you can ask yourself whether you'd rather be optimistic and wrong or pessimistic and right, because if you're go ahead.
It's like antinatalists seem to take all the evil in the world and all the pain and suffering and they internalize it. But stoics seem to take all that and just analyze it and let it fly by and just go in like this Zen thought area and just let things happen. And they don't let it affect their inner outlook. And I think that's the main difference there. And I think both schools of thought could meet somewhere in the middle. And I think, honestly, the human condition is more in the middle of between stoicism and antinatalism. I think the average person is somewhere in between.
Yeah, I believe that they're not mutually exclusive. Remember, philosophy has its roots in the love of wisdom. And I feel that they even as someone that doesn't agree with it, as I said earlier, I still think it has value. I still think it could be used as a teaching tool. And I have no issue personally with anyone. I would never make fun of antinatalists, because that's something I respect knowledge and I respect people that want to educate themselves and are coming to terms with existence. And I would say that I too am a fan of stoicism. I think it's a discipline. However, antinatalism, especially with some of the modern people, also kind of espouses discipline. And I think that I think that antinatalism would make you aware of issues and stoicism would help you find that strength to deal with them as they come by, and a big part of stoicism is having that core, and understanding basically like natural law, which for better or worse, the way I would interpret that is like, if I'm talking to you, I need to be honest with you, because if I'm not honest with you and you act in a way that angers me, whose fault is that really? Is it
Yeah.
your fault? It's really my fault because you're reacting to what I've done. And that's one thing that Stoicism strives to avoid is negative emotions that were caused by your actions. Essentially, you're saying those negative emotions are kind of your fault. So you need to be able to avoid them. And you can usually avoid them. Now, I mean, obviously, you could argue that there's situations where it's like, okay, you can't. Like, you were just walking down the street minding your own business and you got mugged. Okay. I mean, there's always that random element. I mean, that's what makes us human. We don't all think the same, but there's certain things, I think, certain steps you could take, to maybe guard against that. And I'm not going to victim blame because I've had a friend that got mugged and he literally just walked out of, real nice office building in LA and some guy was waiting for him. It's like he didn't do anything wrong. He wasn't walking in the dark. He was leaving work.
So I think this really gets us to the path philosophy took, from ancient Greece and onwards, is philosophers of body versus philosophers of mind. Because to begin with, most of the philosophers were thinking that, you can't trust your mind. You have to trust your senses, your primitive drive, whatever that is, your body. And then more recently, it's been that it's a mind controlling the body, and that you have to trust your mind and not your primitive brain. But I think at the end of the day, they're both right in their own way, and it's important to not get bitter because I think it comes down to a bit of both.
Like I said, it's a spectrum, and I think the average human would agree that we meet somewhere in the middle. But on to euthanasia. Whether you're an antinatalist or a stoic, you're here and you're alive now, and maybe the pain becomes too much. Maybe you have a terminal illness. Maybe you just want to kill yourself. How do you feel about euthanasia?
You want to start, Snug?
Sure. Yeah, I think that in the case of suicide, following the path of antinatalism, when a person is born, they're already born. They can't change that. And, it's not like you should kill them, for existing and put them out of their suffering. It should be in their own hands and their own voluntary choice at that point. So I feel that suicide is perfectly fine. But I disagree with how most antinatalists would feel about euthanasia, because I've seen some expressing that, if a person is suffering a lot, if they're in pain, they have no friends or family, that there's nothing wrong with, say, killing them in their sleep. And obviously that person would never know and would simply cease to exist. But I think that that's that own person's decision, and it's wrong to make that involuntarily for them.
Well, most definitely. And I think 99% of regular people, normal people, anybody you'd interview on the street would say, if you asked them that metaphor, they would be like, that would be murder. And I believe that would be murder. But for me, when it comes to euthanasia, you got to decide. Like, I don't have a problem with someone taking their own life. But there's got to be boundaries. Because you have the chronically suicidal and you have the acutely suicidal. The acutely suicidal are people that need to get help for their issues. The chronically suicidal are people that have gotten help and it just never got better. And this, we're talking about, year, 2, 3, 4 years of being suicidal and no relapse, no remission, Those people, especially if it's related to a terminal illness or a birth defect or something like that that's keeping them from living their lives and they're constantly depressed or suicidal, I could see euthanasia. But it's their choice, And I feel like here would be my system for it. If you go to your doctor and you tell them, I want to die, I want euthanasia, I believe there should be a form you fill out. I believe your doctor should immediately start you on every treatment they can, and that you would have to go through every treatment on the book about. And then you'd be able to sign the euthanasia waiting list. And that waiting list should be at least a year. And if you have any doubts in that year, you have to go through the process again. You have to go through the whole year again. And if you make it through a year, they bring you in, and then you get to push that button. I think that would be the way to do it in the most, what would you call it? The most humane way. You know what I mean? That makes sense.
Well, I can see that, but I do feel like there is something morally wrong with interfering with a natural death. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because when I'm not saying that God exists, but when you play with God, when you play with things that you don't understand, that such as people's existence when they're already alive, I think that's really dangerous. And like you said, it's really important to specify and to be careful what you say about euthanasia and antinatalism, because Hitler and his men began to use antinatalist implications to kill people, such as people in mental asylums. They'd say, these people are suffering, these people's lives are simply filled with misery and suffering, and it's a slippery slope. So they started to use that, to off people. And
I'd like to
before we continue on,
points.
I just want to say thank you, Onion Helmet, for following. Welcome to Through the Looking Glass. If you're a first-time viewer, thanks for stopping in. We'd love to have you participate. We got our Discord down in the description, and you're welcome to participate and chat at any time. Thanks, man. Going back to Slag, what were you saying?
So I want to make 3 points. I'm going to work my way backwards. The first one is that euthanasia, as you were saying, it was misrepresented, and I'm going to use 2 words: cui bono, who benefits. So Snug was saying that Hitler and these other horde monsters killed lots and lots of people and tried to justify it. But really what they were doing is they were just trying to make their economy better. They were trying to reduce the drag. It is not at all an acceptable way. I'm not an apologist in any way. I think these people were vile, and I'm kind of torn between whether or not they should be forgotten or not, because we should learn from their monstrosities.
Definitely.
But I think that also utilitarianism can also rear its ugly head, which is doing, the good for as many people as possible. And I really do believe that being at peace, if you want to end your own life, the responsible way is just being at peace with yourself and making peace with your family. They may not be on board, of course, because they love you and they want you to be around as long as possible. But if you honestly feel that you're a drag yourself, if you feel that's where I'm coming from. If you feel that you're inflicting too much pain on the people that you care about, then I believe you do have the right. Yeah. Now, onto Favosky's point, I also think that that's a very good idea, which is, you should go through a waiting period, because it's like buying a gun. You really shouldn't go and make decisions when you're angry or sad or having these extreme emotions.
Definitely.
Yeah, that goes back to stoicism. It's like you really need to decide if that's what you're going to do, because you're going to cause harm. Like if I came to Flav and said, Flav, I'm on the suicide track. That's going to hopefully, not intentionally, but he's going to feel bad about it. He's going to be like, oh man, I'm going to miss this guy. Well, what if I change my mind? I've terrorized you. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, definitely.
So, and then initially what Snuglington was talking about, I think tied in. I said I was going to make 3 points, but it really, the first thing I said kind of just ties into this. It's cui bono. It's like, if you're going to put the pillow over someone's head while they're asleep, why are you doing that? Is it because you feel that grandpa is old and dying and you want to put him out of his misery? Or is it because you don't want to be there anymore? Is it because you don't want to see him suffer? Or is it because you don't want him to suffer? There's a big difference.
Oh, definitely. And my idea on the suicide waiting list, it's not perfect. And when we deal with the nitty-gritty and messy issues like this, I don't think we could ever come up with a system that would be perfect or do the issue justice. We just got to look at it in the most stoic way possible and just try to separate ourselves from the emotions and look at it logically and find the best solution that we can. Because we're only human, And none of us are experts. We're just a bunch of guys that, hold a podcast, and this is just our opinions.
That is so true. I would say that it's not perfect by any means, of course, especially for people that are suffering from terminal illnesses. I do not consider being very sad to be a terminal illness. I mean, we're talking about people racked with pain. These are guys that had AIDS in like the 80s, the 70s, before there was any real strong treatments that were really, really readily available and helping them. We're not talking about people that are just bummed out. It's a touchy subject, and I think that people just need to come to terms with it and figure out what the root cause is of why do they want it? Is it really for suffering? My heart goes out to the people that suffer from these terminal illnesses. I was a fan of Jack Kevorkian.
Yeah,
I was a fan of Dr. Death.
Yeah.
I believe that he was doing the
100% for euthanasia for terminal illnesses. If your illness is terminal and you can bring a doctor before a judge and the doctor say we can't manage his pain, then I don't think you should have a year waiting list. I think you should be able to do it as soon as possible if you want to. Because you have a legitimate medical reason. Your pain is outweighing, the reason to live at that point.
I think it's a family thing. I think it's like you talk with your family and you see what they say, because I guarantee you're going to have the "Papa, we don't want you to go." And what are you supposed to say to that? Are you supposed to say, well, I mean, are you now being, it's weird. I mean, are you being selfish now by wanting to end your life early? Or are your relatives being selfish because they want you to hang in there because they love you for that extra X amount of time? It could be a week. It could be a month. It could be years.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I think that people who say that suicide is selfish, are honestly generally ignorant, because they just don't understand the levels of how deep a depression can get, how long somebody can be suicidal for, and this sort of a thing. And I know that suicide isn't exactly the same thing as euthanasia necessarily. There's a bit more of a complex and professional standpoint there, but
falling out of a window accidentally is technically suicide.
What do you guys think about suicide being illegal?
Being illegal?
Yeah, if you try and kill yourself or kill yourself, it's technically illegal.
Well, I mean, I read a story about a guy that tried to shoot himself, and he survived the attempt, but he got charged with a felony for discharging a weapon in a city limit. Which, I mean, come on, guys. This guy just tried to kill himself. It's like insult to injury. This guy just tried to kill himself. Does he really need a felony charge? Any future that he had is now completely null and void. What kind of heartless bastard puts that on somebody? What kind of prosecutor would even make that charge?
You see, I myself, Snug, I do think that suicide can be selfish. I don't think all of it is. I try not to think in extremes about too many things. But I think there are cases where that's true. Like we were discussing this yesterday with like Robin Williams. It's like, who wanted to see Robin Williams go? Nobody wanted to see him go. But he had a problem. He was horribly, horribly depressed. And apparently I don't want to denigrate his name, was self-medicating and just decided it was a good idea. But I think that it can be selfish because, for example, here's a scenario. This is one scenario that I went through myself. Because I'll admit right now that I was suicidal when I was younger, and this is what got me out of it. What got me out of it? What's going to happen to my family when they find me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Definitely.
So let's say I just jump off a cliff and wash away in the ocean. Well, now they're going to spend a lot of time looking for me. So I didn't want to inflict that sort of harm. And whether or not you agree with it, modern psychology has said that having a support network, having a strong family, that is something that can really help ground you. So I do feel for the people that they don't have that. They don't have that real friend. They don't have that connection. or the people that are living for someone else. And I don't think you should really live for someone else. I mean, it can be a noble thing you're doing, like, you know what, I've decided I'm going to work and earn as much money as possible for my two new nieces that are born in this planet, and then one day I'm just going to die, but I've done the right thing. It's like, really, they would love to have you around, you know. I think.
Could we?
Yeah, I mean, anyway. I think it's definitely important, you know, if somebody has experienced a death of a personal loved one in their life, you know, I have experienced a friend of mine who it wasn't a best friend or anything, but I knew pretty well, you know, killed himself a couple of years back. And, you know, I still think about that every day. You know, it really sticks with people, and the amount of damage that does really is incalculable. However, I do just think that when people do take their own life, you know, what people focus on, they shouldn't focus on too much about the negatives and how this person was selfish, and should try and understand the pain a little bit more that this person went through.
I mean, maybe there's a lesson in there somewhere.
In most things there are. But we're getting close to our hour mark, so let's go ahead and... Can we all agree that euthanasia for terminally ill, we all agree with, and euthanasia in general should be strictly regulated in the general population to make sure that when people do it, it's not an impulsive act, that it needs to be thought out and, you know, regulated.
I mean, even though I think that humanity could basically screw up anything if we tried hard enough, I do think that euthanasia is a formal, whatever you want to call it, ceremony or process or what have you. I think it should have a place, because there are definitely people where that could be the only choice they have.
Yeah. So, Snuggleton, you want to make a thought on that?
Yeah, I'd agree completely with Slagnasty.
So, all in all, closing thoughts on what we talked about tonight. Anybody got anything to say? I mean, we pretty much found tonight that antinatalism and stoicism are just spectrums, and most people reside in the middle. We can learn from both school of thoughts. We talked about euthanasia and how it could have a place in our society, especially for the terminally ill. And like I said, guys, follow us. Follow the stream. You can chat with us in Discord and be a guest on the air with us. Ask us questions. We'll talk to you. We go live every night but Sunday, 7 p.m. EST on Twitch TV. You can find our VODs uploaded after the fact on Twitch and on our YouTube channel, ttlgwfas. Any closing thoughts, guys, before we go off the air?
I'm going to let you go first, Snug, if you want.
Sure. I just want to say that, you know, all these things that we talk about sometimes, not that it will always be like this, although these are very complex and hard to talk about things, you know, what is real will prosper. You know, what you feel in the night and what you feel in the morning and the daytime, you think that other people don't have these same thoughts and that you're alone in this thinking. But other people do have these same thoughts, and it breeds. And when you display these thoughts, you know, it brings a certain amount of comfort in people. So that's all I wanted to say.
Well, it's through the looking glass for a reason. Nothing is off limits. We're putting everything under a microscope. And let's not bottle. These things are unhealthy when they're bottled up. It's time to bring them to light. It's time to put them through the looking glass and talk about them. Slag, your closing thought?
I just want to say that there's a lot of information out there, and I don't think people should focus too much on one school of philosophy. I think a lot of them have very good things in them. They have a lot of value. These are very, very intelligent people that have been honing these concepts for millennia. I mean, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, guys.
So that was Isaac Newton that said that, correct?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But, you know, stay the course. And like my friend Snug said, just you're not alone. Reach out.
All right, guys. Well, we're going to wrap it up. This was Through the Looking Glass with Favoski, Lucy, and Slag. We will see you back here again tomorrow night at 6:50 p.m. We will start the stream 7 o'clock p.m. EST. The mics will go live. Until then, we're signing out, guys.